A white Karen calls the cops on a black woman, but in court, the woman reveals she's a CIA agent. It was one of those flawless spring afternoons in Pinewood Park, the kind you see featured on postcards advertising small-town charms. Bright blue sky, gentle breeze rustling the leaves, children giggling on the swings. The last thing anyone expected was that by day's end, every major news channel in the nation will be running a story about prejudice, hidden identities, and extraordinary justice. Jordan Kane was listening to a lo-fi mix through her earbuds, strolling around a large pond at the center of Pinewood Park. Ducks floated lazily, occasionally dipping their heads beneath the water in search of something edible. Jordan was supposed to be taking a rare day off, her first in months. She'd already indulged in a leisurely breakfast and an overdue FaceTime call with her younger sister, Kayla, who was finishing college in Boston. The sun's rays warmed Jordan's cheeks, and for a moment, she thought she could actually relax. Her everyday life was stressful in ways she could never quite put into words. When people asked what she did for a living, she offered a vague explanation about consulting for the government. By necessity, it was always left at that. A perfect day. Then she noticed a woman near the bench closest to the pond. The woman's posture radiated tension. She stood stiffly, arms folded over her chest, lips pressed in a hard line, wispy blonde hair pinned back into a neat, tight bun. She eyed Jordan with wary suspicion. Jordan had never met the woman before, yet the stare from the stranger sent an immediate pang of anxiety through her. As a black woman, Jordan was all too familiar with that look, one that managed to be both fearful and accusatory at the same time. Jordan reminded herself that not every suspicious glance was as loaded as she sometimes perceived. She'd come to Pinewood Park for peace. Don't let her ruin your day. She tried to ignore the stony gaze, returning her attention to the footpath that led across a small wooden bridge. As she reached the midpoint of the bridge, an elderly man feeding breadcrumbs to the ducks glanced up and waved at Jordan. She smiled back, noticing how the beaks of the eager ducks nibbled at the falling crumbs. She slowed, momentarily captivated. It was then that she heard the high-pitched voice shouting from behind her. Excuse me, miss." Jordan paused, removing one earbud and turning around. Sure enough, the blonde woman marched toward her. Jordan's heartbeat skittered. She took a steadying breath. "Yes." The woman placed her hands on her hips. "I don't know what you're doing here," she said, voice trembling with an odd mix of anger and fear. "But that bench is mine." Jordan's brows furrowed. "I'm sorry. I wasn't anywhere near your bench. I'm just enjoying a walk." "That's my bench," the woman repeated, glancing around as though the entire park were her personal property. "I come here every Saturday at this time, and I don't need you hovering in my space, making me uncomfortable." Jordan's heart sank. She recognized the posture, the tone, the entire scenario. A white woman, commonly labeled a Karen on the internet, who assumed that anything and everything in the vicinity was subject to her control. Jordan tried to be polite. "Ma'am, I'm simply walking. I'm not using your bench. I'm not doing anything other than I saw you with that suspicious phone of yours, pointed in my direction." Jordan's mouth dropped open. "My phone has been in my pocket. I was listening to music. I'm not filming you or anything." "Well, you can't be too careful these days," the woman said, shaking her head. "I've seen plenty of videos of people getting harassed in parks." Jordan's jaw clenched, but her voice stayed even. "I assure you, I'm not harassing anyone." The woman hesitated, then pointed a manicured finger, jabbing the air near Jordan's face. "Now, you can either walk away from this park, or I will call the cops." The statement made little sense. Jordan was free to enjoy a public park, like anyone else. She did not want a confrontation, but she also didn't want to be bullied out of a public space. Her frustration was building. "Ma'am, I have every right to be here. If you feel uncomfortable, you can move away from me, but I haven't done anything wrong." A muscle twitched in the woman's jaw. Jordan watched as the woman stepped away, rummaging in her purse. Before Jordan could attempt a calm conversation, she heard the beep-beep of a phone unlocking. The woman was already tapping a few buttons. Jordan's entire body tensed. She's actually calling the cops. Another cliché scenario. But cliché or not, these things happen far too often. Jordan felt a wave of disbelief, embarrassment, anger, and not least, concern for her own safety. Encounters with law enforcement could turn ugly in an instant, especially once racial biases were triggered. The elderly man with the breadcrumbs across the bridge watched with wide eyes. A couple walking hand in hand paused to see what the commotion was. Jordan felt her face flush as the woman unleashed an exaggerated, theatrical performance. "I'm calling 911, the woman announced. "Phone up to her ear. There's this suspicious individual harassing me at Pinewood Park. She's near the benches on the west side." "Yes, yes. She's threatening me. She's trying to film me. I don't feel safe. I need help right away." Jordan's ears burned. She took a deep breath, determined to keep calm. Meanwhile, the woman launched into an impassioned monologue on the phone, describing Jordan's alleged misdeeds. "She's African American," the woman added, as if that detail automatically qualified as a threat. Jordan glanced around for potential witnesses. Most passers-by were too stunned or timid to intervene, though at least one or two people had started filming the ordeal. For a split second, she considered leaving, but on principle, she was doing nothing wrong and felt she shouldn't have to run. "This is insane," she thought. "All of this because I walked by a bench?" What Jordan didn't anticipate was just how quickly the authorities would arrive, and how humiliating it would become. With sirens whining faintly in the distance, she decided it might be best to calmly wait near the duck pond. But the woman continued shrieking into the phone, pacing, building the story into a grander lie. "She's got something in her pocket. I think it might be a weapon." Jordan bristled. Her phone was the only object in her pocket. The adrenaline spike made her tremble, despite her training. Indeed, she'd undergone far more advanced training than the average civilian. Jordan felt the old terror being singled out. What if the responding officers assumed the worst? She had seen enough tragedies on the news to know how easily the situation could escalate. Within minutes, 2 squad cars screeched to a halt near the curb. Police officers emerged, 3 men and 1 woman. The blonde woman rushed over, pointing frantically toward Jordan. That's her right there." One of the male officers placed his hand on his holster as he approached. "Ma'am," hands where you can see them. Jordan raised her palms, eyes wide. She remained perfectly still. "I have no weapon," she said, voice quivering only slightly. "I'm just walking the park." "She threatened me," the blonde woman shouted, loud enough for the entire park to hear. "I have it all on video," she added, ironically, though everyone around could see she'd been the one wielding the phone. The female officer narrowed her gaze at Jordan, who was still calmly holding her hands up. "Just keep your hands visible," the officer said. "We got a call about harassment and potential threats." "None of that is true," Jordan said, voice a bit steadier now. "She told me I had no right to be here and threatened to call you. Then she actually did." She paused, controlling her breathing, not wanting to betray the swirl of indignation in her chest. "I was doing nothing but walking." The blonde woman gave a dramatic sniff, as though on the verge of tears. "She's lying. She was harassing me, filming me, calling me names. I have the right to feel safe in the park." The irony of the statement almost made Jordan laugh. She was the one feeling unsafe. But this was hardly funny. Bystanders started to cluster, camera phones aimed at the confrontation. The officers seemed tense. Another squad car arrived. Jordan tried to read their expressions. Some might have recognized that the complainant's story didn't add up. But no one was calling out the lie just yet. Jordan repeated, "I don't have a weapon. You can search me if you want." The female officer exchanged glances with her partners. "Let's just separate you two, so we can talk this through." "She should be arrested," the blonde woman insisted, pointing at Jordan in righteous fury. "She threatened me. She was lurking near the bench. She's probably up to no good." Jordan's anger finally flashed. "Ma'am, you have no evidence. You're lying to them." Her volume rose despite her best instincts. "You can't keep doing this. This is a public space, and you're lying to the police." The lead officer turned to Jordan. "Ma'am, calm down." He turned to the blonde woman, gently touching her elbow as he guided her a few paces away. Jordan remained under the watchful eye of the female officer. "Do you have an ID?" the officer asked Jordan, voice clipped but not outright hostile. Jordan's eyes flickered with annoyance. However, she knew the drill. "Yes," she said softly, ignoring the way her stomach lurched. "If only you knew who I really am," she mused. She slowly reached into her bag for her wallet. She handed over her driver's license. The female officer scrutinized it, as if searching for a reason to be suspicious. "Address on here is correct? Miss Jordan Kane?" "Yes, that's correct," Jordan said. She knew her official cover name was Jordan Kane, which matched her real identity on paper. So there was no conflict. She was used to handing over documents during minor traffic stops, but never this sort of humiliating fiasco in a public park. At that moment, the blonde woman's voice grew shrill again. "Arrest her," she insisted. "She's not giving you the real story." Look at her pockets. She might have. Jordan exhaled. This is ridiculous, she whispered, but the officer glared. Ma'am, let us do our job. Keep your voice down. Gradually, two officers coaxed the woman away so they could get statements, while the female officer and another male officer asked Jordan for her side of the story. Jordan recounted the exact chain of events, from her walk around the pond to how the blonde woman accused her of filming her and insisted she leave the park. She explained how the phone call escalated and how she never raised a hand or threatened anyone. Ma'am, do you have any video evidence that might support your side? One officer asked. Jordan shook her head. I was listening to music. I wish I had turned my camera on when she confronted me, but I didn't. There might be witnesses, though. The elderly man with the breadcrumbs approached timidly. Excuse me, he said, voice trembling. I saw the whole thing. This young woman, he gestured to Jordan, didn't do anything. It was the other one who started yelling. The officers turned to him, their expressions shifting. Can you provide a statement? Yes, the man said, nodding vigorously. She just walked by. She wasn't shouting, wasn't bothering anyone. That other lady kept pointing and threatening to call the cops. Across the footpath, a bystander with a smartphone stepped forward. I caught part on video, the bystander said quietly. It's not the whole thing, but I think it shows who was threatening who. The lead officer, who'd finished speaking to the blonde woman, rejoined them. He raised an eyebrow as the bystander played back the video. The footage showed the woman glaring at Jordan, pointing at her, and not once did Jordan appear threatening. The vantage point made it clear that the blonde woman was the aggressor. Suddenly, the tension in the officer's stances eased. The older male officer cleared his throat, as if trying to appear neutral. We appreciate your cooperation, folks. Looks like there might have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. Jordan echoed. She lied to you and tried to get me arrested. Silence. The blonde woman stood off to the side, twisting her lips in frustration, eyes darting to see the bystanders filming. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Ma'am, the lead officer said to the blonde woman, it appears your story about being threatened isn't adding up. He paused, measuring each word carefully. We're going to let the matter rest if you agree to peacefully leave the park. The blonde woman bristled. Are you kidding me? She's the one who started it. I'm the victim here. Karen, someone in the crowd shouted, and the woman spun around, outraged that she had been labeled with that viral moniker. Camera phones captured her fury. Jordan stared, uncertain whether to laugh or scream. After all this, the police were basically going to let the woman walk away with no consequences. The injustice felt heavy in her chest. The officers, apparently eager to avoid making a scene, were prepared to chalk it up to a misunderstanding and let it go. What happens the next time she does this to someone else? Jordan thought. One by one, the squad cars started to pull away. The female officer gave Jordan's driver's license back and offered to Kurt, "Have a nice day, Miss Kane," then turned to depart. Bystanders shook their heads, some chanting, "That's not right. She should be charged with filing a false police report." But the police had no appetite for a deeper confrontation. The blonde woman glared at Jordan for a long moment, then stalked off. Jordan stood there, heart pounding, her day off in tatters, humiliation boiling into anger. She had no desire to remain in the park. She brushed off the stares of onlookers, murmuring a faint thank you to the bystander who'd shown the video, and headed toward the exit gate. Across social media, the crowd captured footage of the confrontation would soon go viral, though Jordan wouldn't know this for several hours. She was in no mood to check her phone. All she wanted was to retreat somewhere private, catch her breath, and push down the wave of indignation that threatened to erupt. She had no idea how large this story was about to become, or that it was only the beginning. That evening, Jordan sat in her modest apartment, flipping absent-mindedly through TV channels. She had changed into a pair of sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, hair tied up in a loose bun. On her table lay a half-eaten bowl of leftover pasta. She kept checking her phone, which buzzed every few minutes with texts from friends, family, or unknown numbers. Each message repeated some version of, "Did I just see you on Twitter? Or is that you in the hashtag Karen Park incident video?" "Oh, God," Jordan breathed, head sinking into her hands. She tapped the Twitter app. Already, the video had racked up tens of thousands of views. The clip that garnered the most attention featured a close-up of the blonde woman theatrically announcing she was calling the cops, then the short snippet of Jordan calmly explaining herself to the officers. The tweet read, "Another day, another Karen harassing a black woman who's just trying to live her life. Hashtag Karen Park incident, hashtag Pinewood Park." Hundreds of comments poured in, some tagging mainstream news outlets. People had strong opinions, mostly supportive of Jordan, and outraged by the blatant profiling. Others were outraged at the police response. Quite a few repeated the refrain, "When will this stop?" Jordan sighed, simultaneously moved by the support and overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She had never wanted to be a viral sensation, though her face was partially visible. She wore big sunglasses in the video, so the footage wasn't a crystal clear shot. A handful of people close to her recognized her anyway. She couldn't decide if that was good or bad. Her job demanded a certain degree of anonymity. Then again, it wasn't as though she revealed any details about her real occupation in the clip. She scrolled some more. A local news station had picked it up, calling it the Pinewood Park confrontation. They described the unidentified black woman as unjustly profiled by the blonde woman, whose identity was not revealed in the first wave of coverage. Jordan felt a knot in her stomach. Public attention rarely made life easier. A knock at the door made her jump. She cautiously peered through the peephole. It was her neighbor, Allison, who lived down the hall. "Hey, Allison," Jordan said as she cracked open the door. Allison's eyes were wide. "Girl, are you okay? I saw the video. I didn't know it was you at first, but then Karen from downstairs texted me saying she recognized you from our building and—" Jordan sighed. "I'm okay. Shaken up, but fine." Allison stepped inside, glancing around as if expecting paparazzi to leap out from behind the couch. "This is crazy. I can't believe that woman tried to pull that nonsense on you. But it's all over the internet. People are furious on your behalf." Jordan exhaled. "I'm not used to this kind of attention." Allison shrugged. "Well, maybe this kind of public outcry will help keep these situations from happening so often. And hopefully she gets some consequences. Like, I saw a lot of people calling for her to be arrested for lying to the cops." "I won't hold my breath," Jordan muttered. "Cops never took an official statement from me in writing. They just let her walk away." Allison gave her a sympathetic look. "Are you going to come forward publicly? Do interviews or press charges?" Jordan grimaced. "I don't think so. I mean, I can't go on the news. My job, it's complicated." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Plus, I don't want more attention than necessary." Allison nodded, though her curiosity was evident. She knew Jordan worked for government in some capacity, but never pried. "I get it. Well, anyway, I want to check in and make sure you're okay. If you need anything, let me know." They parted with a hug, and Jordan thanked her for stopping by. Once the door closed, Jordan flipped the deadbolt and leaned against the door, letting out a long exhale. "My job." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from her mentor at the agency, a woman named Harriet who had once served as Jordan's field training officer. The text read, "Saw you on the news. Everything okay? Be cautious. HQ may have concerns if you get too much media attention. Let me know if you need anything." Jordan scrolled back to the viral tweet. She typed a brief message to Harriet, explaining that she was physically fine, but also anxious about how public this had become. Harriet responded with a simple reassurance. "We've dealt with bigger PR nightmares. You're not at fault. Breathe." Jordan appreciated Harriet's calmness. In that moment, Jordan had no idea that the real storm would gather in the weeks to come, culminating in a court case that would reveal more than she'd ever intended. A week later, Jordan woke to find a sealed envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a summons, indicating that there were official charges pressed against her for harassment and attempted assault. The complaining party was the same blonde woman from the park, identified as Elizabeth Beth Arlington. Jordan was stunned, rereading the documents to ensure she understood them correctly. Beth was claiming that Jordan had menaced her and threatened physical harm. She was apparently doubling down on her fabricated accusations. Jordan's jaw clenched. This was an official summons to appear in court. She had never had a personal brush with the legal system. Her work with the CIA occasionally required testifying in certain sealed sessions, but never had she been a defendant in a public hearing on bogus charges. This turned her stomach. "Unbelievable," she muttered, pacing across her living room floor. She called Harriet, updating her on the situation. "She's claiming I threatened her life. She's saying I was filming her with the intent to blackmail. She filed a complaint with the local DA, or something." Harriet's voice crackled on the other end of the line. "This is more serious than a petty spat, Jordan. Let's not forget your real job. If this goes to trial, you might be called to the stand. We have to consider how to protect your identity. You'll need agency legal counsel to coordinate with your attorney." Jordan pressed a hand to her temple, massaging the tension building behind her eyes. "I can't believe this is happening." Harriet paused. "Were there witnesses at the park that day?" "A few bystanders, some with partial video. It's all over social media." Then I wouldn't be too worried about a guilty verdict, Harriet said. But we have to be strategic. The last thing the agency wants is for you to blow your cover. On the other hand, we can't let you be railroaded by a false accusation. We'll talk to the higher-ups about how to handle this. For the next few days, Jordan navigated a blur of paperwork, calls with lawyers, and strategy sessions with an agency liaison. Officially, she was not required to disclose her CIA affiliation unless under extreme circumstances, but the possibility existed that a judge might need to be informed in a closed session. The entire situation felt surreal. Meanwhile, the public conversation about the Pinewood Park incident flared up again. Once Beth's side of the story came out, tabloids seized upon it, she said dynamic, fueling sensational headlines. Right-wing bloggers claimed it was a hoax-hate incident. Progressive outlets pointed to the bystander footage, insisting Beth was the aggressor. Jordan found her name plastered everywhere, though no one knew the real story of who Jordan Kane really was. Beth seemed determined to paint herself as a victim. In interviews on local news segments, spliced into social media clips, she put on a convincing show of tears. She claimed she just wanted a peaceful day in the park, that Jordan had insisted on encroaching on her personal space. She insinuated that Jordan used menacing language. Beth's performance was well orchestrated. She wore pastel sweaters, dabbed her eyes with tissue, and repeated the same lines about feeling terrified for my safety. Jordan watched those interviews in disbelief. It was almost comedic, but the possible consequences for Jordan were grave. If the legal system took Beth's claim seriously, Jordan faced fines or even minor criminal penalties that could jeopardize her security clearances. While Jordan was confident a judge or jury would see the truth, she knew better than to underestimate how a case could be skewed, particularly if Beth's side had more resources. And it turned out Beth had connections. She hailed from a well-off family in the region. Her father was a local politician, a county commissioner for over a decade. That might explain how she had the nerve to push a false narrative this far, counting on the system to side with her. All the while, social media activists demanded that Jordan fight back. They wanted her to countersue for defamation, or at least for filing a false police report. Jordan's attorneys prepared for trial. The entire fiasco loomed on the horizon like a dark thunderhead ready to unleash havoc. The day of the preliminary hearing dawned, gray and cold. Pinewood County Courthouse was an imposing stone building that sat in the center of a meticulously landscaped lawn. Tall pillars flanked the entrance, lending a sense of authority and gravity. Jordan arrived with her attorney, a calm and collected woman named Sylvia Locke, who'd been recommended to her by the agency's legal department. Sylvia's specialty was navigating cases with secrecy concerns. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of reporters and camera operators loitered, hoping to grab a shot of the defendant and plaintiff. Jordan wore a conservative blouse and blazer, her hair neatly pulled back, minimal makeup. She kept her head down, ignoring the bursts of camera flashes and the shouted questions. She felt the presence of agency staff in the crowd. Though they wore civilian clothing, they were there to protect her if anything went awry. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Jordan's stomach churned. She had faced countless high-stakes situations in her real line of work, some life-threatening, some nerve-wracking. But this was different. This was personal, humiliating, and at the same time, deeply important to her future. Beth Arlington arrived shortly after, swanning into the corridor with a confident smirk, flanked by an older man in a tailored suit, her father, presumably, and her attorney, an equally suave figure who straightened his tie as they walked. A small gaggle of supporters trailed behind them. Beth shot Jordan a sneer, then quickly morphed her expression into one of practiced victimhood for the cameras. The hearing was less dramatic than Jordan anticipated. It was primarily about whether the case should proceed to a formal trial. The presiding judge, a stern man with silver hair and a crisp black robe, listened impassively to opening statements from both attorneys. Beth's attorney, leaning heavily into his client's claims, argued that Ms. Arlington felt threatened, that Ms. Kane was loitering in the park with the intent to harass. Jordan's attorney calmly countered with references to the widely circulated video footage, stating that Ms. Kane was merely walking in a public space. At the end of the hearing, the judge stated he would review the evidence and witnesses to determine if the case had sufficient merit. A trial date was set 6 weeks out. Jordan left the courthouse feeling exhausted. She hated that the judge didn't immediately dismiss it, but she had no choice but to press forward. During those 6 weeks, the media frenzy swelled. Pundits debated the issues of race, class, and false accusations. Meanwhile, Beth's father used his influence to spin the story in local political circles. Jordan endured surreptitious online harassment, from hateful direct messages to strangers questioning her real motives. She filed it all away, quietly determined to see justice done. But no matter how prepared she felt, She was not fully ready for the bombshell that would drop during the trial. In the midst of cross-examination, Beth's attorney made a pointed remark about Jordan's job. That was the moment Jordan realized she had no choice but to reveal her real identity, at least in part, to dismantle the lies. The morning the trial commenced, Pinewood County Courthouse was buzzing with onlookers, journalists, and legal experts. The public seats were packed. Jordan gulped as she took her seat at the defense table. Sylvia placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," she whispered. "We've got the facts on our side." Beth sat a few feet away, wearing a demure white blouse and a pencil skirt, hair pinned back, posture righteous. Her father sat behind her, arms folded, face set in a grim line. The trial opened with Beth's attorney, presenting their case. They called Beth to the stand, and she spoke tearfully about how she felt unsafe and intimidated. She described Jordan as lurking near her bench, repeated a lie about Jordan possibly possessing a weapon, and insisted she call the police as a last resort. Her voice trembled with well-rehearsed emotion. From the corner of her eye, Jordan could see members of the jury looking on with polite neutrality. They were taking notes, carefully absorbing every word. Then came cross-examination by Sylvia. She remained calm, her tone methodical. "Ms. Arlington, you say you felt threatened. What, specifically, did Ms. Kane do make you feel that way?" she asked, focusing on the factual details. Beth tensed. "She came close to me, made a rude comment about me sitting on the bench, then acted like she was recording me." Sylvia nodded slowly. "And you told the 911 operator she had a weapon, correct?" "That's what I believed at the time," Beth said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Do you have any evidence that Ms. Kane threatened you with any object?" Beth pursed her lips. At the time, I didn't, but I felt threatened. She was being aggressive." Sylvia arched an eyebrow. "The videos from witnesses show Ms. Kane standing calmly, hands visible, while you're pointing at her. Have you seen those videos?" Beth's expression hardened. "They're selectively edited." Sylvia paused, let that hang in the air. "So you're saying the bystanders who filmed were part of a conspiracy against you?" Beth stammered. "No, that's not. I'm saying you can't see everything from one angle." She avoided eye contact. Sylvia moved on to the contradictions in Beth's statements. The cross-examination was firm and thorough, exposing the lack of any real corroboration for Beth's claims. Yet, Beth stuck to her script, continuing portrayal of a frightened victim. By the end, the jury seemed unimpressed, but it was still too soon to celebrate. When the defense presented their case, Jordan's attorney called multiple witnesses first. The elderly man who'd been feeding ducks testified about how he saw no aggression from Jordan. Another bystander who shot partial footage described the entire chain of events. The 911 call was played in the courtroom, revealing Beth's dramatic claims. Jordan noticed a flicker of discomfort cross Beth's attorney's face when the operator's voice was heard calmly, trying to get Beth to explain exactly what threat she faced, only for Beth to repeat ambiguous statements. Finally, Jordan took the stand. She felt her heart pounding as she swore to tell the truth. She answered Sylvia's questions about the day in the park, her personal mood, her desire for a peaceful walk, how the confrontation occurred, and how the police responded. Then came cross-examination by Beth's attorney, a man named Theodore Green, who had a slick manner of speaking. He wasted no time. "Ms. Kane," he began, pacing before the witness stand, "please tell the court about your occupation." Jordan's stomach clenched. She kept her expression neutral. "I work as a consultant for a government agency." "Which agency?" Jordan's eyes slid to her own counsel. Sylvia gave a subtle nod. "I work for the Central Intelligence Agency," Jordan said softly, the words hanging in the silent courtroom. A rumble of whispers passed the spectators and press. The judge banged his gavel lightly, calling for order. Beth's expression flickered with confusion and shock. Her father's posture stiffened. Cameras clicked quietly, though it was typically not permitted in the courtroom. Some journalists had press passes for after-trial coverage. Word would spread instantly. Beth's attorney smirked as though he'd scored a big reveal. "You're a CIA agent? That's your official position." "Yes," Jordan said carefully. "I'm an analyst with training in field operations. I'm not a clandestine officer posted overseas, but I do handle sensitive material." The attorney pounced. "So you have training in self-defense?" Jordan paused. "Yes. In your line of work, you could subdue a threat, correct?" Jordan narrowed her eyes. "Yes, I could if necessary." Beth's attorney raised his voice dramatically. "Then if you truly felt threatened that day, Ms. Kane, why didn't you neutralize Ms. Arlington? Why not use your special training to subdue her, or call for help from your government contacts?" Sylvia objected on grounds that the question was argumentative. The judge allowed a measure of leeway, but told Green to get to the point. Green turned back to Jordan, voice dripping with insinuation. Ms. Kane, with your specialized training, you're hardly a vulnerable innocent. Could it be that you're using your advanced skills to intimidate my client? A wave of murmurs spread through the room. Jordan inhaled, collecting herself. He's trying to spin this. I never used or threatened violence in any way, Jordan replied calmly. I told her I was simply walking in the park. I didn't even raise my voice until she called 911. Green's gaze sharpened. But as a CIA agent, you have means and methods that ordinary citizens do not. How can we be sure you didn't approach Ms. Arlington that day to gather intelligence? Jordan almost laughed at the absurdity. Gather intelligence on a random woman in the park? That's not how any of this works. She forced herself to remain composed. I was there on my personal time. I was not on an assignment. I had my phone to listen to music, as proven by the witness recordings. Green pressed further, making insinuations about Jordan's potential to gather personal data on unsuspecting civilians. He tried to paint a picture of a cunning operative, trained in psychological manipulation. But no matter how he twisted the narrative, the fundamental logic was flimsy. Jordan had come to the park for a leisurely walk, not a covert operation. Sylvia effectively parried Green's questioning. She rose, objected multiple times, and insisted that this line of questioning was irrelevant. The judge, though exasperated, allowed some latitude but ultimately recognized irrelevance. In the gallery, reporters exchanged excited whispers. CIA agent harassed by Karen would make for even bigger headlines. Jordan swallowed. She could see Beth's father, whose face had blanched. This was not the story they'd expected to unfold. By the time Jordan stepped down from the stand, the tension was thick. The short break that followed allowed the attorneys to regroup. During the trial's final phase, Jordan's attorneys introduced new evidence. Cell phone records that detailed Beth's 911 call timestamps and her frantic texts to a friend bragging about putting that mouthy woman in her place. The friend had turned over the texts when subpoenaed. The messages revealed Beth's prejudice and her desire to show that girl she can't come around here scaring me. The friend had apparently tried cautioning Beth not to blow the incident out of proportion. That part of the conversation was devastating for Beth's credibility. The text contained lines like, "She's so full of herself, I'll just say she threatened me and let's see her talk back once the cops are here." The jury was shown these messages, and the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. The smirk on Beth's face disappeared. She turned pale, realizing the depth of her mistake. She'd built her case on the false narrative that Jordan was the aggressor, but now her own words betrayed her. Beth's attorney tried damage control, claiming the messages were taken out of context and that Beth was simply venting fear. But the tone of the text was undeniably gloating. One read, "LOL, that girl messed with the wrong person." The shift in the jury's demeanor was unmistakable. Even the judge looked displeased. Beth's father's shoulders slumped as if he realized the battle was lost. The final nail in the coffin came when a forensic analysis of the 911 audio determined that Beth had never told the operator about any direct threat from Jordan. She'd only made vague claims of feeling unsafe and afraid. That evidence pointed to a potential malicious intent in her report. After the closing arguments, which involved Jordan's attorney making a passionate plea for justice and shining a light on how false reports waste police resources and harm innocent people, the jury deliberated for a mere 2 hours. When they returned, their verdict was clear. Jordan was not guilty of the absurd charges. In fact, the judge took the rare step of admonishing Beth for a reckless misuse of the justice system and indicated that the district attorney could explore perjury or false report charges against her. Relief washed over Jordan in waves. She squeezed Sylvia's hand, tears stinging her eyes, an avalanche of stress sliding off her shoulders. The judge dismissed the case, and the gallery erupted into chatter. Some reporters rushed out to file stories. Others lingered, hoping to catch statements from either side. Jordan watched as Beth rose from her seat, face pale, eyes glistening. The self-righteous veneer had cracked. She exchanged heated words with her father, who looked furious, though it was unclear if he was furious with Beth or the entire fiasco. The father marched out courtroom, refusing interviews, with Beth trailing behind him, accompanied by her attorney. A cluster of cameras swarmed around them, capturing every last humiliating moment. Meanwhile, Jordan stood beside Sylvia, who gave her a proud smile. "We did it," Sylvia said. Jordan nodded. "Thank you for everything." Sylvia lowered her voice. "Be prepared. The press is going to be all over you about the CIA angle. If you need me to run interference, I'll do what I can." At that moment, Harriet, Jordan's mentor, stepped out of the crowd. "The agency is aware," she said in a hushed tone. They're okay with you telling the press you're a low-level analyst, leaving it at that. We'll spin it to protect your privacy. No direct interviews about classified work, obviously. Jordan felt a wave of relief. Thank you, Harriet. Harriet nodded, eyes warm with empathy. You did well. Let's get you out of here. The immediate aftermath was a media circus. Jordan tried to keep her head down, issuing only a brief statement through Sylvia's office, thanking the jury and the judge for recognizing truth, reiterating that she never posed a threat to Ms. Arlington. Major networks covered the story. CIA agent vindicated in Karen cop call case. The narrative that had once threatened to brand Jordan as a harasser now flipped. She became a symbol of resilience, an example of how destructive false accusations could be, and how determined, systematic legal defense could turn the tide. Beth Arlington's father attempted damage control in the local political arena, but the blow to his family's reputation was severe. Some civic groups demanded his resignation, claiming he'd supported his daughter's malicious use of law enforcement resources. Meanwhile, the district attorney made a statement that they were considering charges against Beth for filing a false police report. The matter would go to a grand jury. Beth's father tried to use his connections to ward off consequences, but public sentiment was firmly against them. Online, activists and everyday citizens cheered the verdict. Influencers posted side-by-side clips. Beth's meltdown in the park, the bogus 911 call, and Jordan's calm testimony. The phrase, "You never know who you're messing with," trended on Twitter, referencing the shocking twist that Jordan worked for the CIA. Within weeks, the district attorney announced that Beth would face charges for making a false statement to law enforcement. A court date was set. She entered a plea deal to avoid trial, resulting in court-mandated community service, a steep fine, and an official admission of wrongdoing. She also had to release a public apology to Jordan as part of the agreement. The apology was televised, a subdued affair in which Beth looked down at a piece of paper, voice wavering. She acknowledged that she'd misrepresented the facts and that racial bias played a role in her perceptions that day. She apologized to Jordan for the distress caused. The statement was likely written by her lawyers, but it contained enough direct admissions to serve as a measure of accountability. Jordan watched a replay of the apology on the evening news, Harriet and Sylvia by her side. She didn't find pleasure in witnessing Beth's humiliation. Rather, she felt relief that the truth was recognized. She hoped Beth might genuinely learn something from the consequences. That's something, at least, Harry remarked. Not many people in these situations ever have to publicly admit they were wrong. Sylvia nodded. A rare outcome. Let's hope it sets a precedent. Jordan exhaled. It's enough. I'm ready to move on. Over the next month, Jordan tried to slip back into routine. She resumed her usual duties at Langley, sorting through intelligence briefings, occasionally traveling for discreet field work that didn't attract the public eye. Colleagues sometimes tease her, "So we hear you had an interesting time off." But no one pried. Within the agency, there was a tight-lipped respect for her personal boundaries. She was grateful. Outside of work, Jordan noticed that strangers occasionally recognized her from the viral story, but she tried to keep to herself. The intensity of media coverage slowly dwindled, replaced by newer controversies. The world moved on, yet the experience left Jordan changed. She realized how precarious justice could be, how easily a lie could shatter someone's life if circumstances aligned. She felt more empathy for those who lack resources or social support to fight back against false accusations. She also felt proud of herself for standing firm, for not letting fear drive her away from the park that day. One afternoon, while grocery shopping, Jordan came across the elderly duck-feeding man from the park. He recognized her immediately, face lighting with warmth. "Ms. Kane," he said, "so glad to see you." Jordan returned the smile. "Hi, I'm sorry, I never got your name." He chuckled. "Walter Mitchum. It's nice to run into you again without the police around." She laughed softly, nodding. "Likewise. Thank you for stepping in that day. It meant a lot that you spoke up." Walter waved a dismissive hand. It was the right thing to do. That lady was obviously in the wrong. He hesitated, gaze kind. "I'm sorry you went through all that trouble. I kept up with the case in the news. I'm relieved it all worked out in your favor." Jordan felt a swell of gratitude. "Me too." Walter smiled. "I hope to see you in Pinewood Park again someday. It really is a lovely place, aside from that fiasco." Jordan's eyes glinted. "I think I'll visit again soon. I won't let one bad experience scare me away." With that, they parted ways. Jordan pushed her cart to the produce aisle, a sense of closure warming her chest. The world might be full of people like Beth, ready to weaponize prejudice, but it was also filled with people like Walter, quietly choosing courage and kindness. On a bright Saturday morning, Jordan finally decided to return to Pinewood Park. She wore her usual casual attire, leggings, a light jacket, and running shoes. She popped in her earbuds, turning on a calming playlist. As she walked past the entrance gate, she felt a pinch of anxiety. She half expected to see a swirl of drama, but it was peaceful. Couples picnicking, children playing, an older woman walking her dog. Jordan made her way to that same bench by the pond. Empty at the moment, she sat down, inhaling the fresh air, letting the sunshine bathe her skin. Then she pulled out a small paperback novel from her tote bag. She planned to read for a while, maybe watch the ducks float across the water. Moments later, the elderly Walter ambled along the footpath, a small paper bag of breadcrumbs in hand. He spotted Jordan, raising a palm in greeting. Jordan waved back. She felt an almost surprising sense of contentment, as though a circle had been closed. No sirens, no shouting, just a lazy breeze drifting across the pond. Her life would never be truly ordinary, given her clandestine work behind the scenes of national security. But for this moment, she was just a woman enjoying a park bench. She reminded herself that justice, while not always guaranteed, was still achievable with enough resolve. Months after the trial, Jordan learned through local news updates that Beth had completed her court-mandated community service at a homeless shelter. In the grand scheme, it was not a large penalty, but it was more than many had expected. The piece that made Jordan smile was hearing from a mutual acquaintance that Beth's experiences at the shelter had opened her eyes. She apparently struggled to understand why some of the shelter's residents faced discrimination and hardships, similar to what she herself had inflicted upon Jordan. Perhaps it was the beginning of some personal growth. Maybe not, but at least it was a spark. Meanwhile, Jordan continued her life, fulfilling her duties in national security. Occasionally, she got recognized at coffee shops, approached by well-wishers who said, "Aren't you that CIA woman from the Karen video?" She usually offered a polite nod, murmuring that she preferred to keep a low profile. Despite the swirl of public interest, she managed to keep her cover mostly intact, thanks to the agency's PR machinery. Reflecting on the ordeal, Jordan felt a surge of gratitude for the people who had rallied to her defense. Friends, family, even strangers on social media who'd amplified the truth. She felt thankful for Harriet, whose unwavering support from the agency side had guided Jordan through the legal minefield. She felt thankful for Sylvia, a brilliant defense attorney, who systematically dismantled Beth's lies in court. Though the trial was behind her, Jordan recognized that the deeper issues of prejudice and misuse of police power would persist in society. Hers was a single story among countless others. Yet, her story came with a twist that shocked everyone into paying attention. Perhaps it spurred some conversations, changed a few hearts and minds, and served as a cautionary tale for those who thought they could weaponize 911 calls without consequence. And for Jordan herself, it reaffirmed a fundamental lesson. Truth can prevail if we stand firm, gather evidence, and rely on allies who refuse to be silent. In the hush of Pinewood Park, accompanied by the gentle quacks of ducks, she realized that sometimes justice does arrive, though it may require a fight and a few revelations along the way. Nothing would ever erase the pain of that day's humiliation, or the frustration of being targeted for doing nothing more than existing in public space. But for Jordan Kane, analyst, CIA agent, and survivor of viral fiasco, there was a satisfying peace in the knowledge that, in this instance, justice was served. She had stood her ground, revealed her truths when necessary, and emerged stronger. The rest was up to the world to make sure it didn't need to happen again.